So we've discussed where to start when you want to be a DM and you want to play with your friends, but we haven't discussed much more than that. What do we do after we decide we have a world to play in? What do we do when we have ideas? How are we even going to play this world? That's today. So before we get into like the meat of the episode, we haven't really discussed the thesis of this series, and really the idea here is it's not just for DMs, it's not just for players, it's for both. Kind of the idea is if you or a group of your friends watch these videos together or separately together, if that makes sense, you should kind of find which roles you want to do. Most people, of course, are players. That's just the nature of it. Not everyone is suited to be a DM. Some people are definitely more suited to be a DM than a player, or some people are just as good at both. It takes a special kind of person to be a DM, I think, because it takes someone that's a little more dedicated. There's a lot of preparation that goes into it. And part of that preparation is deciding, are we going to kill shit or are we going to role play? There's sort of a balance to be struck here because some people don't like just role playing, and a lot of people don't like actually talking in character. And I guess we could talk about that a little bit in this episode. So the first thing we're going to discuss is role playing, and the second thing we're going to discuss is killing shit, which is a fun part of D&D, but I think once you start combat, the sandboxiness, the openness of the world, it shrinks. So combat should be an important aspect, not just a thing we do all the time. That's me, though. You guys could absolutely try to do it. So role playing. How do we get the players to talk in the voice of their characters? And do they need to be a good experience? The short answer to that question is no. You don't have to talk in character all the time to have a good experience. I have players, a couple of them, that don't really talk in character a lot. Hugo is in my group, and he talks in character, but it's pretty much Hugo being that character all the time. I mean, you guys, he's already good at that. And then my girlfriend, who's played the same character for a couple different campaigns, she's pretty comfortable with that character. But the other two, they're both kind of feeling their characters out. Now, they're both invested in their characters because we've done enough to kind of give their characters some, breathe a little life into them, if you will. But neither of them usually do a voice, but they're getting close to it. And that's kind of the point. For me, role playing is one of the more interesting aspects. If you're a fan of Critical Role, for instance, you know that role playing, I mean, they're voice actors to be fair, but roleplay is huge on Critical Role. It's kind of what makes Critical Role better than any other D&D stream, in my opinion. They do these serious moments with character building, which, of course, not a lot of tables are going to be interested in. So how do you strike a balance between I want to have role play because I've seen Critical Role, I've seen other people have good D&D sessions, I want people to talk in character, and not just always going around being murder hobos and wandering the wastes or the woods and just killing things, because that can get really boring, although some people really enjoy it. The first step, and I think this is the most important step, and they won't buy in unless this happens, you, the DM, you have to break that seal. If you aren't comfortable with talking in character yourself, why should the players? There is also places where you could roleplay every single interaction all these characters ever have, but you don't need to. You could easily summarize these situations, even with characters that have already gone by. You could go to a shop, and you've seen the shopkeeper a million times, and you don't have to talk in the voice of Bob the shopkeeper. But I have a character named Sig, who is a little tiny halfling sort of guy, and he's a weirdo. He kind of talks like this, and he's always like, ooh, that's pretty cool. See, you're already talking to Sig as soon as I do that voice, and immediately you're interested. What's that character like? What's he got going on? What's he selling? And it took 3 seconds of that. You could literally start off by saying, hello, welcome to my shop, and then never talk in the voice again, but they'll be thinking of that the whole time. Now, personally, especially the first time they meet interesting NPCs, I try to talk in the voice the whole time. I think it's more fun, and it lets them kind of breathe a little bit and get them loosey-goosey. And once people start laughing and stuff, I guess the uncomfortableness of acting in front of your friends kind of falls away. And of course, the more sessions you have, the more comfortable you guys are all going to be with this, and it'll be fine. The first session is never going to be roleplay heavy unless it's all people that you've played with before. I don't think there's a situation, unless it's like Critical Role, but they were playing for a couple years, I think, at least 1 year before they even filmed it. So, and they were playing Pathfinder. The second thing you need to do, kind of let the players know at the table that you encourage roleplay and you will give them stuff for it. Hugo's character and the other characters have all talked NPCs into or out of different activities, or they bartered. I let them barter a little bit and see if they could get some free stuff, because that's just fun. It's cool. Or cheap stuff, or stuff that maybe they weren't really willing to sell, but it worked out. And of course, you make them do rolls for it. But if the role play is really good, in your head, set the difficulty class, the DC of this roll, instead of making it a relatively difficult roll, which is a 15. I think it's not super hard, but at a low level, that's a challenging ask for anyone, even a bard that uses charisma a lot. Set the DC maybe at 10 or 13 or something. It doesn't matter. Just set it a little bit low. I reward really good role play with small things like this. Maybe I'll give 10 extra experience points. And right now, that's not going to do a lot, but I write a little thing down in my notebook, and over time, like, they've easily gotten close to 500 extra experience points just by doing cool, fun things, because I think that should be rewarded. Now, not every dungeon master is like that. A lot of dungeon masters are only willing to give experience points for beating enemies and stuff, but I give them for critical success unlocks. Really awesome role play is, of course, the thing. Fun moments in combat. Maybe someone wants to do something that's not necessarily in the rules, but you can finagle the actions and have them do specific dice rolls to get that done. Like maybe someone wants to do a front flip over top of a goblin and stab them in the heart, which did happen in my game, and I allowed it. She had to do 2 rolls for it, but she got them both, and why not? It's fun. It doesn't really change combat that much, but it's fun, so I give a little bit of bonus experience here and there. But they also get stuff like items from time to time. Think about it as sort of a reward system. If they give you a positive experience as a DM, you should give them a positive experience as a player. It's sort of kind of a give and take. The third thing that I think you should do in regards to getting your players, or if you're a player getting your fellow players, to role play, is to talk about each other's characters and be interested. Like, genuinely listen to everyone's character. And as a DM, maybe ask outside of the game during a break, maybe text them during the week in between sessions, like, hey, what would your character do in this situation? Like, if you have a question about the character, definitely ask, because first of all, they probably never thought of the answer to the question you're about to ask, ever. Especially if they're a new player. Right now, their character is a piece of paper to them. Really, the piece of paper is more of a sloshy, sort of imperfect summary of your character. It shouldn't be like, the piece of paper is not your character. We'll talk about that in another video. But if you bring up questions that they've never thought about, and I talked to you about the questionnaire I had in the last video, stuff like that really helps. And if you are a player, asking yourself these questions. If I'm Jake the Cheese Wizard, why am I a cheese wizard? Did I study wizardry and decide that cheese was also delicious? I mean, clearly I think cheese is delicious in real life, but do I think that in the game? Or maybe the cheese wizard doesn't like cheese, but it's the only way, it's the only substance that seems to work with his magical imbuement. I don't know, it could be interesting, could be fun. As for combat, how often should we have combat? I would talk about this during what we call Session 0, or the beginning of Session 1. Session 0 is typically, everyone sits down, you just kind of hang out, there's no real playing that day. Everybody rolls characters typically on Session 0, or are finishing up characters. I like my people to roll in front of me, because I'm the DM, just to make sure there's no funny business, because there might always be that person that thinks it's fun to cheat. I can tell you, it's as a former player and a current DM, it's never been fun to cheat at D&D. Always, like, roll in front of people, roll your attacks and stuff in front of people, let everyone see, because it's exciting. Failure is a part of life, and because you're a hero, especially a low-level hero, and at first level, you're not even a hero, you're literally like right above a commoner. You're just someone that happens to be trained in whatever class you happen to be, like a wizard. Now, some DMs might start at level 3 or something. That's fine. Do whatever you want to do as a DM. You can start at any level. You never have to start at level 1. During this Session 0, talk to your players. Do they want to fight stuff a lot? Are they more interested in the world? Are they more interested in exploring? Ask them what they do in certain video games to kind of get a sense. Like, when you play Skyrim, do you walk around and do the side missions a lot? Or are you more about just walking into a random dungeon or killing the town full of people? If you get a town full of people answer, you might want to consider having a lot of shit to kill from time to time. Really good low-level enemies that you can kill a shit ton of. Things like skeletons and goblins. Those are always cannon fodder. They're always easy. They have low-ass hit points. They're easy to hit. And the visuals of it are cool. I think goblins specifically are neat because they sort of have their own language. They talk in goblin. And they have bigger units, so they have things like hobgoblins. Often orcs might hang out with goblins. Bugbears, which are like giant hobgoblin things. My players actually fought a bugbear recently on top of a tower, and it was a really cool moment, and they really enjoyed it. They were high enough to where the goblins weren't really a big deal, but it was such a long sort of trek up that slowly they ground away their resources, which is kind of how I structure my battles, if you will. And I also think, what do you want to accomplish by the fight? Are you just throwing a fight at them for the sake of having a fight in your session? Also, encounters don't always have to be fight to the death. I think that's important to point out. It can sometimes be offer the bard a chance who's not very good at combat to talk people out of it. Maybe the cleric, in our situation, she doesn't always want to kill people. Like, she barely ever wants to kill people. She killed a guy on accident the other day and felt really terrible about it. It's just important to let your characters, and your players specifically, have a voice in what kind of game they will run. Now, as a DM, never throw the same experience at them over and over and over. You can recycle tropes, never recycle experiences, and I'll explain. I can have them climb another tower someday, and I'm sure they will. But in that tower, there's not going to be goblins, and especially not in the same setting. And there might be goblins in that one, but it wouldn't be nearly the same. Last time they had people abducted, I wouldn't have goblins abduct people again. And if they did, it wouldn't be someone they knew, and it would be a different situation, and they would not expect what was coming. It shouldn't just be, let's go in and always murder everything and always be overpowered. Fight should be challenging. Now, some people like Matthew Colville, for example, he doesn't usually like to pull his punches at all. And I don't mean while you're rolling behind the screen. I mean, he'll set up an encounter and maybe not balance it all the way. And sometimes that works for him. It works for him probably more often than it doesn't because he's been around D&D for a long time. But I haven't been around it for 30 years. I've been around it for a couple. So I don't have this sort of wealth of knowledge of, oh, well, in my experience, players at this level can typically handle something like this. I play it as, okay, balance like it says in the book, roughly. And then if you want to add something cool, go ahead and add something cool. For instance, the bugbear that was on top of the tower at the end of that little adventure had a mace, and that mace, if he hit with anything, any attack, it would push the character 10 feet. Well, I pushed the cleric right off the top of the tower, and through some things due to her class and her race, she was able to get back on top of the tower and save some people. But the other players didn't know, so it was kind of this cinematic moment. They didn't know she had these skills. It was really, really cool. And I didn't do that on purpose. We had kind of talked about like, oh, like I have this ability. Wouldn't it be neat to, if something happened, and I try not to metagame with her. I actually don't let her in the office when I'm working on stuff. I try really hard not to cue her on anything, and she gets sort of annoyed at me. But it's fine, because she has a good time at the table, and that's what matters. Not my relationship, not the longevity of it, not the quality, how good our D&D sessions are. I'm going to be alone. But it was a really cool moment, and bugbears don't normally have that ability, so it was interesting. You can just do stuff like that anytime. You can add a spell and take away a spell. You can mess with monsters all the time. It doesn't matter. But what's the balance? I allow roleplay in the fights, first of all. I think that's interesting. So if they want to use part of their turn to talk people out of things in character, talk to each other in character, absolutely fine. I also think sometimes you need combat-heavy sessions. Sometimes you need combat-light sessions. We had a session recently. We started with a combat. They wanted to go to a sort of a fighting arena where they could place bets, and they wanted to do that. So we did it. And then for the next, we played for a long time. We played for about 6 hours at a time. We start at 3 and usually end around 9 or 10, which are longer than normal sessions. But, so we actually had a nice long stretch in the middle until the very end where there was no fights at all. It was role-playing and exploring and travel. It was several hundred miles. And of course, you can run this as fast as you want. They had a random encounter, but it wasn't a super long one. It didn't last many rounds at all, so I'm barely counting that as a combat. So I guess we had 3 combats on that session. But I mean, it lasted, I think, 2 rounds. So we barely even got initiative in before everything was dead because this particular enemy didn't have a lot of hit points, and it's a whole story thing. But it was interesting, and they just kept going, and they were very interested in the world and what was going on, and there was mysterious things occurring. And then by the time we got to the end, there was a huge combat, and we had 3 of the players or 2 of the players really stressed out. Hugo and Sarah, Hugo obviously co-host, and Sarah, my girlfriend, weren't as stressed out because they kind of figured that, oh, well, maybe this situation is a situation we can get out of, but the other 2 were freaking out. I had one player pacing, literally pacing downstairs, and I love fostering paranoia in the players. That's another thing you can do. You can toe the line between role play and fighting. There isn't only these 2 things. In the middle is stuff like paranoia and traps and locked doors and poison and magical spells and all sorts of stuff that follows the middle. So if you don't necessarily want a giant combat with 30 goblins or something, you don't have to do that. Have them fight 6 or 7 goblins, but have like that dungeon be booby-trapped. Have the floor be very slick. Maybe there's a frictionless floor in places. Maybe their walls are crumbling away, and so they have to make dex saves to not have to touch the walls while they walk through this very thin corridor. And if they touch the walls, it'll start to crumble, and then they'll have to get through before it collapses on them. Stuff like that. We had a cool chase scene once. There was an owlbear chasing this cart they were escorting, and they had to push this cart up and over and then go, and it was all impromptu. I didn't actually plan it, but they said that that was one of their most favorite parts of that entire session, was this accidental chase scene they had with this owlbear, who is, you know, they're pretty formidable. I mean, they were only level 3, and it's a level 3 CR with challenge rating, so it would have given them a little bit of a task to overtake. But stuff like that, it doesn't always have to be combat. But if you get a bunch of players that want to play combat all the time, because I know a lot of people, stuff like XCOM, think XCOM, it's very similar in its battle strategy. Or stuff like Warhammer, you have a lot of 40k players coming over, or just anyone that does tabletop stuff like X-Wing with Star Wars, and that's fine. But if you have a mixed bag, I would definitely mix it up. There doesn't ever have to be one thing, and I definitely think we'll have a whole session where we never once get into a combat situation. I actually know that that's going to happen at some point, because they just really enjoy the role-playing. I have a really cool group like that. And now I guess I'm going to field some questions real quick, because we're at the end of the episode, and I've kind of talked about that topic enough, I think. If you have any more questions, definitely down in the comments. We'll hit them up. The first comment is actually from Sarah, my girlfriend. I mentioned that her god in the last episode is Lathander, which is true, and I mentioned that it might be from Dragonlance, which actually is this book. Well, one of these books. This is one of the Dragonlance books. This one's actually Leaves from the Inn of the Last Home, and these have tons of shit in it. She loves these things. Really good setting books, and it's basically, this is a source book. So if you want to have a D&D session in the Dragonlance setting and you want it to be in this area, then absolutely pick it up. But actually, it's from Forgotten Realms, is Lathander, so I misspoke there. Some other people are asking, are we going to talk about stuff for players, like maybe how to roll a character, how combat works, all that? Yes, absolutely, we're going to talk about that. Kind of the way this is going is we're taking you and your group of, say, 3 or 4 friends, so 5 people, roughly. It could be more, it could be less, doesn't matter. We're taking your group of people as if you've never ever played Dungeons & Dragons at all, and we're getting you prepared from start to finish. So the first thing we got to do is you got to have a DM, because you don't know where to play. Then you got to have the conversation about, well, are we going to role play, or are we going to kill shit? Next episode is going to be about what supplies do you need and how to roll characters. We're going to have all you need to know about any books that you might need to buy, although there are going to be free links in the description next time. Definitely some setup stuff, and the way we put our character stuff, we actually file it. Everybody gets their own binder, and I'll show you the setup there, and I find that to be really helpful, especially for new players. And of course, we're definitely we're gonna roll some characters at some point and show you guys how to do that. We'll probably do that episode 4 of this series, And if you have any more requests, absolutely ask me. At some point, I'll definitely show you my setup for DMing. It's actually kind of extreme. I don't know if you need to do it as much. We'll show you how I prep because we'll have to go into the first session. And then we'll talk stuff like, I don't know, maybe philosophy as far as DMing and playing the game is concerned. We'll talk table rules. We'll talk all sorts of stuff. We'll talk to you about how to get different resources to get maps or props in your game, which I do props for my players. And it's a fuck ton of fun and super cheap and easy. You just need a little creativity and some sort of idea what you want, and you can go get it. Oh man, I got so much planned for this series. So honestly, if you have any questions or requests, down in the comments, absolutely. Thank you so much for watching. If you like the show, give it a like. If you like the show extra, give me a subscribe. Definitely share with your friends. Let them know, because if you want your friends to play D&D, I'm going to convince them, goddammit. I'm going to convince them to play D&D with you. And then you guys can be a bunch of little nerds and tell me about your games. Definitely tell me about your games. And if you're starting brand new, I know in the last video a lot of people said, "Oh, I've been thinking about playing D&D. You've inspired me to do it." Great. Let me know anytime I do that, because if I can convert you, then I've done my job. That's kind of the point here. So again, let me know if you guys have any questions or anything. I would love to talk about this. Obviously, I'm a big fucking geek. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'm Jake. This is Unpopular Culture. Come back next time.